Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, as that will help grow my channel. If you'd like to subscribe, I'd appreciate that as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave those and I will respond. Again, thank you. So this week we're going to do, again, something a little different. I'm not going to turn a bowl at all. Instead, I gave a lesson to one of my Facebook friends as part of a contest. And she's going to turn a bowl today. I'm going to provide you with a little bit of instruction on how to turn a bowl. You're going to get to see what she's done. And at the end, she's going to end up with a very nice bowl. I also want to mention, for those that have been following me all along, thank you very much. I am going to be running a contest. So I just ask that you provide a comment in this video and just put contest in the comment, just specifically the word contest, and I'll draw a name from those people that have put a comment in, and you'll receive a free bowl that I've worked on as well. Not sure yet what that's going to be, but the other criteria for this is that I get to 500 subscribers. So currently I'm at 350. When I get 500, I will do the draw, and whoever's entered into the contest will be eligible for that draw. So I do ask you to subscribe as well. In order to get the subscriber numbers up so we can make the draw, I ask you to subscribe. So for that, you'll need a Google account. And as you're watching my videos on YouTube, you can just go and hit the subscribe button. And again, that will increase my subscribers. And once I get to 500, we'll do a draw. So with that, let's get started. And let's learn how to turn a bowl. Thank you. So these are the different chisels that I have. I have more, but generally these are the major types, and the rest are just variations on this. Different sizes of the same thing. But I just want to walk you through each one, and then I'm going to show you on the lathe how they're used and what the differences are between them, and again how they cut differently. The first one is a gouge. So this is a bowl gouge. It's heavier than some of my other smaller gouges. A gouge is generally what makes a gouge is the shape of it. So you can see here it's got a U-shaped flute to it. A gouge will remove a lot of material quickly. The flute allows wood chips to come away very easily. And the other thing that you're going to notice about a gouge is you see here this bevel. It's got a bevel here and on the sides. So this is what's referred to as an Irish grind, a fingernail grind, or in this case it's a 40-40, which just means the angle at which it's ground. So generally when you're using this tool, you ride this bevel up against the wood. So you can cut anywhere here on this surface. So you can cut right at the very tip, and then along either side as well. So if I can get this in a little bit closer, hopefully that'll focus. Well, but again, this is the bevel, and then this is the cutting edge along here. Anywhere along that edge you can cut, and you'll see that when we move over to the lathe. So that's a gouge. Again, used to remove a lot of material very quickly. The next tools are scrapers. We'll use this one first. This is a round nose scraper. So with that, you see the profile. It's flat on this surface here. The bevel is now down here, and it's only this part right here that cuts. Generally on a scraper, you do not ride the bevel, so this is generally not rubbing against the wood. You just push this sharp edge into the wood, and that does the scraping. Generally, when you sharpen these, it'll end up rolling this edge up, and you'll get a little burr right across this surface, and the burr is what does the cutting. Again, we'll see that when we move over to the lathe. This is just another scraper, but this is called a negative rake scraper. So the difference on this one is you'll notice it is beveled this way and also this way. So it's more triangular. If I can get this in focus, hopefully you can see that. So it comes to a triangular point sloped on both sides. Both scrapers do a good job at removing material, but they give you a much finer surface. They generally will not remove as much material as the gouge, so it's going to be slower turning with this, but it's going to give you a smoother finish. This is another form of a scraper. It's called a skew chisel. It's generally used more so in spindle work, but it's the same sort of principle, and you'll also notice that it is also shaped like a negative rake scraper. It's got a bevel on both sides. Generally, again, you're just cutting on this edge right here and not riding the bevel. Another one, a parting tool. So this is used at the very end to remove a piece off the lathe. So it's generally used just to cut a groove. So you can see here, it's instead of being shaped this way with the bevel on this way, it's actually this way. And generally you just push that straight into the wood. It cuts a groove. And again, that's used generally, it's called a parting tool. It's used to remove the work off of either when you get it clamped into a chuck or whether you have it glued onto a waste block. And this is how you'd remove it. And then the final tool that we're going to use today in this project is a carbide scraper. Now, carbide scrapers are relatively new tools. Some purists generally don't like them, but I would say that these are a good compromise between being able to remove a lot of wood like a gouge and getting a nice smooth surface like a scraper. So it is a scraper principle. So if you see this here, zoom in a little closer, you can see this carbide tool. This is a round one. I have round, I have square, I have diamond shape. But it's this surface here that cuts. Again, you use it like a scraper and then you push it straight in. Generally, you're not riding the bevel. You're just, apologize for the focus here. You're just cutting with this surface right here. And being carbide, they last a long, long time. When they do get dull, all I do is back this bolt out and then just rotate it a little bit and expose a fresh surface to the carbide. Again, it will give you a fine finish and it will remove a lot of material. Again, kind of a compromise between the gouge and the scrapers themselves. Now let's go to the lathe and see how these work, see them in action. Okay, let's talk a little bit about safety. So when I'm turning, for me, the mandatory safety device is eye protection. You're going to see here in a minute, there's going to be wood chips flying, and they do hit you in the face. So you do want to be wearing eye protection. Some people like to wear a face shield, a full face shield. I prefer just to wear the safety glasses. The wood chips don't generally hurt when they hit your face, so I just prefer to wear the safety glasses. So that is mandatory safety equipment. Generally, I do not wear gloves. Some people will. I've seen some turners will take gloves, remove the fingers, and just wear the glove but not the fingers. Gloves can be more of a danger than they are helpful, in that the glove itself can get caught in things as it's spinning around. So generally, I do not wear gloves. The only reason that you'd want to is sometimes the chips and the material coming off whatever you're working on can get a little hot. So sometimes it's a little hot on your hands, but generally it's not that bad, and I go without gloves. Okay, so the other thing to talk about is just how to get started. I've got a spindle here in my chuck and on a live center, and I'm just going to show you what the different tools, how they work on the lathe. But I do want to mention one thing I always like to do is whenever I have a piece of wood, and I see this is bowed pretty badly, always give it a turn by hand to make sure that where your tool rest is, you want your tool rest as close to the wood as possible, but you want to make sure when you turn it that it's not going to hit. So just give it a test spin before you turn it on by hand to make sure that it's not going to hit. That's number one. Number two is how you present the tool to the wood. You always want to make sure that you put your tool on the tool rest first and then slide it into the wood. You want to make sure that you never come into the wood with your tool off the tool rest, because as this is rotating, it's going to want to take that, it's rotating this way towards me, it'll take that chisel or tool, in this case a gouge, and it's going to want to push it down. So you want to make sure that you're on your tool rest to start so that you don't have it slamming down and doing any damage either to the tool rest or to your finger, which may be underneath. Now, I'm left-handed. Generally, those, whether you're left or right, you generally keep your dominant hand on the bottom of the tool and your non-dominant hand up on your tool rest. This hand, in this case my right hand, although I turn either way, this hand just steadies the tool so that you can slide it back and forth as I move down the wood. And the back hand is really what does the work. It's lifting the tool, it's pushing the tool in and out, changing the angle and so on. This hand is just here to more or less steady it. So again, remember this is a gouge. We talked about this earlier. The important thing in a gouge for the most amount of control is we want to ride this bevel. So let's see what that looks like. By riding that bevel, that means I'm going to be rubbing that up against the wood. So let's go ahead and do that. This may not have been a good example because the wood is fairly warped, so I'm not getting good contact. But you can see it's removing big material and not very smooth. Now, as this gets round, it'll get smoother because right now it's bouncing a bit because it's not round. But you can see it's removing a lot of material. That cut I was doing is known as a push cut. So what that means is I'm riding the bevel, I'm getting material here in front of the tool and I'm pushing it down. Think about shoveling snow. You're pushing for my Canadian viewers at least, you're pushing the snow in front of the shovel and you're getting a ridge and then you're just pushing that further and further out your driveway. That's really what you're doing with this gouge. You're riding this bevel right here up against the wood. You get a ridge in front of you and then you're just pushing. And on a bowl, I can be pushing 1/4 to 1/2 inch sometimes, depending on how well it's cutting. So again, the gouge will remove a lot of material. Up here I'm rounder, so you can see there I'm actually getting a pretty good surface. But you can also see I was removing a lot of material. Let's compare that to a scraper. Again, the scraper just comes straight in. I hold it flat on my tool rest. Again, with two hands. I'm just cutting with it. You can see now the difference. That's very small chips, and as that gets round, they'll get even finer. I went back over this where it was really rough before from the gouge, and you can see now that I've got a pretty smooth surface. So that just shows you the difference. This is going to give you a really smooth surface. It's going to be a lot slower than the gouge. Now, I should go back to the gouge and mention, a gouge can be used as a scraper as well. I'm riding the bevel here and I'm doing what's called a push cut. I can also do a pull cut where I'm cutting this way and coming back. And in that case, I'm riding on this edge right here, on the edge of the gouge. And it's really working like a scraper at that point. You can see there the chips are a lot smaller. And again, I'm getting a nice smooth surface. So I can do that. You do have to be a little bit careful. Gouges are responsible for catches. If you're going to get a catch in the wood, which means it's going to dig into the wood, it's going to be with a gouge, not likely a scraper. It can happen a couple ways. Number one, when I'm cutting, if I bring this tail end of my tool, you can't really see it, but if I were to bring this up and bring the tip of it down below the center line, it can cause it, because this is rotating towards me, it can cause that to drive into the wood. The other thing is when I'm on, even if I'm riding the bevel and I'm coming down here, if I turn this over a little bit and I catch these edges of the gouge right here, that can also cause a catch. So you do have to be aware of that. So okay, let's finally just go to the carbide tool. So again, similar to our scrapers. So you can see it removes wood a lot faster than the scraper does. The chips are in between, but I've got a very good surface with that. So that's kind of the basics of the tool. We're going to go into turning the bowl itself. You're going to see Tanya, who's a first-time turner. You're going to see what she's doing on the lathe, and I'll do some more explanation as we go through. Tanya used the gouge initially on the outside of the bowl, but it's really meant to remove a lot of material quickly. And on the outside, we didn't have a lot to remove. So she was more comfortable using the scraper, as you can see here. It still can remove a fair bit of wood, but in a much more controlled fashion. So that seemed to work best on the outside of the bowl. And I'll do the same. Sometimes I'll use a gouge, and sometimes I'll use a scraper. Depends on the wood, the shape of the bowl, and the conditions at the time. But I think I'm thinking you might have gotten rid of, well, still a little bit there, but it's pretty good. A little bit there, but pretty well gotten rid of them. Not a whole lot more. I would probably take that corner off a little bit, transition it a little bit more, so you don't have a hard...
So kind of hang there for a sec, or
yeah,
work it back.
And you can probably push it a little bit harder, remove a little bit more. Why don't you try this one, the carbide, and see whether or not, same principle, but I think you're going to find it'll remove a lot more wood. So with this, one thing is you want to keep that level. It may want to turn, and sometimes you may find a slight angle on it will help. If I'm going to do an angle, it would probably be that way as opposed to this way. But I would start off with it square and do the same thing. Introduce it back here and pull it up. Keep it perpendicular to the surface of the wood. And I think you'll find it'll cut a little bit more aggressively. The carbide tool is a good tool to use, especially for beginners. As you can see here, it does remove a lot of wood fairly quickly, but at the same time leaves a very smooth surface. And you're a lot less likely to get a catch using a carbide tool than you are with the gouge. Here, Tanya's just working some of these lines. You can see them on the screen here, just ahead of her tool. She's just working the she's just working the carbide tool back and forth until the evidence of any of those lines you see have disappeared. Here on the bottom of the bowl, we've got a fair bit of material to remove, and the angle is a little difficult to get the scraper in. So I've switched to the gouge, just demonstrating to Tanya how I would hold the gouge on the bottom of the bowl. Now generally, with the gouge, or with any cutting tool, you want to go uphill on the bowl. not downhill, which I'm doing here now. So I do go slowly just to make sure that I don't get a catch, because you are more likely to get it going downhill than you are uphill. But just slowly pushing the tool down, just working away at that base and smoothing out the bottom as I go. Now Tanya's got a smooth surface on the outside of the bowl, so now she's just using a bit of sheet paper just to do the initial sanding on the outside of the bowl. I typically do both a little bit of sheet sanding and also some power sanding. I believe the grit on that paper is 60 grit, and then once I finish that, then I'll switch to power sanding at 60 grit as well and move on up through 600 grit. Now you can see that Tanya switched to the power sanding and just works her way up and down on the outside of the bowl and progressing up through the grit. I'm going to recommend on the inside that we start with the gouge. It is easy on the side to use the gouge. Where there is a spot, and all turners have an issue with it, I do too, and that is the transition point when you're coming down this wall and you transition from coming down here to here. This is where you're going to have an issue. Now it's very important on the inside here is to make sure that when you're coming down that you're not also doing this, because you will get a catch. If this goes like this, you're going to get a bad catch, and then we'll be
Dave's trying to get
yeah. Well, the problem is you've already got this to diameter. If, let's say, we're down to here, we're close to final diameter, and we get a catch, then you may not have enough wood, it will get too thin. So you want to make sure. So I usually will use my gouge to get started. Again, remove till I get close, and then switch to one of these two scrapers. And it really is just a matter of which one's working better. Because I find with these, it's a lot easier to manage that transition point with this than it is with this.
Yeah, because I seem to struggle with this a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair. Most people will. I think, though, you'll actually find it a bit easier on the inside. The trick is to get it started. So I would, to get it started, definitely just use that tip to get a bit of a ridge so I can do this. If you just come in like this, the danger is it'll hit that and it'll just skate across there and you'll end up with a gouge on this surface, which we've already finished. Now, the other thing you can do, some people may say it's cheating, but whatever works, works. You can start with use that to establish, not quite round, there. Establish a lip, and then now that will ride up against, because you're already inside the bowl. Because the thing is, when you're inside here, it's not going to push you out this way because you're inside, right? Like it's captive. So once you get that lip established, you know, the harder part is done. So you do have that now. So you might want to just do a little bit more with this, and you can even bring it out a little bit to get to the closer to the thickness you want. I wouldn't think we'd want to go any thinner than that to start with. We might as we get down close, but why don't you try that and just establish a bit of a rim? You can push it in, make that a little bit deeper, and then we'll switch to the gouge. But you'll find that a lot easier to establish that rim. Again, here's Tanya using the scraper just to establish a lip in which the gouge will ride up against. I don't always do this, but it is a way of making it easier for you to manage the starting with the gouge. Now that Tanya has the lip established, she's using the gouge, riding the bevel, and just pushing the gouge down the side of the bowl. And you can see here, removing probably 1/4 of an inch of material at a time as she's doing the push cut and pushing the gouge down the side of the bowl. It may seem like I'm doing a lot of work on Tanya's bowl. I really did not. It just so happens that this seems to be the footage that I captured. Here I'm just demonstrating to Tanya how you can use the gouge as you come down closer to the bowl, towards the bottom of the bowl. As you do this, you do have to rotate it a little bit to make sure that the sides of the gouge do not catch. Now that we've got the bulk of that material removed, Tanya switches to the negative rake scraper, which again is a lot easier to control through that transition point from the side to the bottom, and does a really good job at just making some final smoothing cuts because the gouge does sometimes tend to leave some fine lines in which the scraper is very good at removing. Here Tanya's just doing a final cleanup of the inside of the bowl, putting the final shape on it, removing any rough spots at all, and using the negative rake scraper to do so. I do like the negative rake scraper on the inside of a bowl. The negative rake scraper does a good job at cleaning up and giving that final surface, but also the practicality, it has a much longer handle, and it makes it a little bit easier to swing inside the bowl than it does the short handle on my regular scraper. So here Tanya's just doing the sanding now on the inside, following the exact same process we did on the outside, starting off with the sheet paper, switching to power sanding, working her way up to 600 grit. We did not show it, but then we also applied the polishing paste and the wax to the bowl, which is food grade safe, and finished the bowl that way. If you're interested in that, I show that on many of my other videos. You can take a look at those and see how that was done. A lot of people are curious as to how long it takes to make a bowl. In this case, Tanya spent about an hour on the outside and about an hour on the inside and about a half an hour on the finishing. So in total, about 2.5, 3 hours to complete the bowl. And that was with a lot of stopping and starting and a little bit of instruction. So for her first time, she did a very good job. Now the bowl is complete. The only thing left is to engrave Tanya's name and a logo on the bottom of the bowl. In this case, Tanya is an avid sailor, so we incorporated a sailboat into her signature line with the date in which she made the bowl. Here's some final shots of the finished product. This is the inside of the bowl, and it was bird's eye maple. And as you can see from this picture, this bowl had a lot of eyes in it. Not only did it have a lot of eyes, it also had some tiger stripe, as you can see here on the side of the bowl. Turned out to be a very beautiful piece of wood, and was turned very well. Here's the logo that I talked about, again with her name, a sailboat, and the date in which she made the bowl. I would like to say congratulations to Tanya on completing her first bowl, and a very, very good job done overall.